Our analysis is that, 25 to 30,000 jobs.
If you repurpose the apprentice levy, that could be used to help solve some of the financial problems.
That has to change over the next few years. That is why we're investing so proactively in that space at the moment.
Hello and welcome to The Northeast Edge, brought to you by Newcastle University Business School with me, visiting Professor of Innovation and Enterprise, Charlie Holt, and my co-host, Dr. Fiona Whitehurst, Associate Dean of Engagement and Place. We're both interested in regeneration, social impact, and growing the Northeast economy from the edge of England, and also looking at what edge the Northeast has in a global context. So we're bringing guests into our studio here in front of St James's Park, or our studio to the guests, some of them on screen today. Thank you very much, Andy, to talk about Newcastle region, past, present and future.
So today we are joined by Henry Kippin and Andy Haldane. We've already had a podcast session with Sir John Hall. He gave us the view from a builder, risk taker and regional provocateur.
We've been practicing that word.
We've been practicing that word and I still can't get it out. A man who made his fortunes in property, sport and placemaking, and who has never been shy about telling others where he thinks they have failed. In this episode, we're going to hand a challenge to a different generation of regional and economic leaders. So as I said, we're joined by Henry Kippin is Chief Executive of the North East Combined Authority, the institution now charged with turning devolution from an idea into economic momentum. And then Andy Haldane, joining us on the screen, is one of the UK's most respected economists, former Chief Economist at the Bank of England, now working across universities, civic institutions and national policy debates, including as President of the British Chambers of Commerce and Chair of Trustees at the Glasshouse International Centre for Music across the Tyne. Together, they bring a different lens to the same question that we were talking to Sir John about. Why has the North East so often had the ingredients of success, but not enough sustained economic liftoff? We will look from the present national challenges, productivity, skills, culture, leadership, and the new shocks of AI, energy transition, and substantial fiscal constraint to see what we might do in the region and what we should aim for. So, some argue that the North East repeats mistakes and talks too much to itself without delivering more widely. Henry first, do you agree?
I'm not sure I agree with that. I think the North East does a good job of bigging itself up. You know, I'm from the North East, I'm from here. We all do a good line in, this is the best region, we love it here. Sometimes I think a bit of insularity is the flip side of that pride. You know, it can be good and bad. The region is probably less porous than others economically, less porous in terms of people coming in and out of the region in leadership positions, but at the same time has quite a, what you'd call in the lingo, a sort of thick social capital, doesn't it? So you can get things done quickly as well. So I think there's two sides to that argument. The North East history suggests you also have to try a few times before you get things right. And that's true on devolution, that's true economically, that's partly true because, as Andy will say, I'm sure, it is more difficult to do certain things up here than it is in other parts of the country. And so trying and trying again, not quite getting it right, and then, you know, keeping going until you do is not a sign of failure. I think it's a sign of quite the opposite in the region, to be honest.
Thanks.
But is that your view, Andy, from a national lens? Are we a region that is doing it better than other regions? Are we doing it the same? Are we reinventing the wheel too much, talking to ourselves and internally?
Very nice to be on, by the way. I agree with what Henry says about the strength that comes from togetherness and what he called social capital. I think that's a huge plus. And the North East has always had that, and will always have that, I think, and it is a considerable strength in these divisive times. Have mistakes, repeated mistakes been made? Yes, as they have nationally. I think some of those mistakes have been excessive churn in the strategies that have been pursued both locally and nationally. I do think that the region has not told a sufficiently forward-looking, optimistic story about itself for some little while now. You know, when I was at the Bank of England, I spent a lot of my time on the road visiting different places. And the truth is, you could spot a mile off those that were doing well. They tended to tell a story about themselves that was optimistic and forward-looking. And those places that were a bit stuck, whose story tended to be backward-looking and a bit pessimistic. And I think, although stories are everything, the narrative that accompanies a region is really important. And the scope to build up and build out that narrative for the Northeast. So it's something that that's still faithful to the past, but has nonetheless got its eyes firmly set on the horizon, on the future, and tells an uplifting story about all of that latent energy we know exists in the region, but too much of which remains unlocked. So I think there is something about learning past lessons, but more importantly still something about telling a story that elevates the region, not just in the region's own eyes, but in national, international eyes as well.
And is that what you do, Henry, or day in, day out? Try and skip from coal mining 100 and X years ago through the 90s when we've had a load of marquee projects, including the glass house on the banks of the Tyne, which were sort of cultural institutions, bridges, arts centres, to good levels of employment that we've got now and an ecosystem of good companies that we've got here?
Let me say two things to that. And I think Andy's point is a really good one, really strong one. Before I came back up to this region, I worked with Andy Street as the mayor in the West Midlands, and his mantra was always guided by a single narrative. It was about Renaissance. We were here, now we're here, and that's where we're going. And you might want to show a graph to illustrate it. Now, not every region has to have that approach, but you do absolutely need a sense of where you're going. In a democratically led organisation, which Devolution represents, so we have a directly elected mayor in this region, the same as Greater Manchester, West Yorkshire, London, others. We have a set of council leaders that form, in effect, the board of directors that I work to. It's not really my job to set the narrative. That's about the political team and what they do and how they capture the public's attention through both voting for them and following that. It is absolutely my job to make sure it's substantial and it's substantiated by actual things that you can touch and taste and feel, whether that's skills programs, the capital programs you're now seeing rolling out in the region, the way the transport network works. So there is a gap between a positive narrative and real things happening in the world, and it's up to us as the senior public servants, if you like, in the region to make sure that gap has closed. And history suggests that's going to be difficult. You know, there's a great quote from the economist, sorry for quoting another economist, Andy, but Duncan Weldon's got this fantastic quote about the UK being like Portugal with Singapore in the bottom right-hand corner. And if you think about where the Northeast is relative to that geographically, albeit in a small country, it's meaningfully distant, isn't it?
That's why our podcast is called The Edge.
Yeah, but in that case, we're trying to correct imbalances or economic dysfunction that has plagued the country as a whole for a long time. It's not going to happen overnight. And you need that combination of political narrative and the fact that it's been written here, which is crucial. It's not handed to us. The region writes it itself through devolution, and then substantive programs and a degree of investment that can make that real.
But you have had good levels of success at getting the money from Westminster to be able to do new generation investment. And those programs have been meaningful, sometimes not so trumpeted?
In my view, yes. And if you're going to ask, do people in this region trumpet their own achievements in the way that our colleagues in other parts of the country do? You probably agree with Andy. We don't. But we are doing a good job of turning this region into a place that feels quite coherent from a political point of view, that is good at collaborating, that is good at working with central government, that is getting better at unlocking private investment. Because let's face it, the moment where the Northeast gets its East German post-reunification settlement of 20 billion year on year is not going to happen with public money. So actually the whole 9 yards here is, what does it take to match and multiply the public investment in the region so that we can leverage much more private investment into the institutions and infrastructure that we have? We're doing a good job. We've made a good start. We're up there with the top combined authorities, you could say. But if we're talking big world, we've got a long way to go. And we're
Can
in
you
the
talk
foothills,
to,
really.
I mean, I know we're also talking in the context of a bit of a political quake over the last weekend, where the composition of the board that you will be working to is yet to be defined. So we're not constant, with 4 of the 7 now going to reform. But we won't dwell on that at this stage because it's still pretty unknown. But can you point to some marquee projects that have happened and that will be rolled out in the next few years that might move the dial?
For sure. So let me first say, devolution typically, and devolution that works well, is a cross-party endeavour. If you look at lots of the combined authorities that have moved quickly, they've had politicians of different political stripes working together. I see no difference here. That is entirely possible to do, and indeed, sometimes that strengthens the bond across the region. It can strengthen the quality of the work with the scrutiny that comes as well. So I don't see that as a negative thing. I think it's in the end, you do this stuff through collaboration. You deliver it through collaboration. We are not a big Independence Day style spaceship that sits on top of the region and suddenly does everything. We're about helping the system to work better.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's through funding, sometimes through strategy and other different interventions. So that's important to say at the outset. On your question, I'd say we've made a really good start. So if you look at some very basic things, I got the metro in this morning. We've got a brand new fleet of metros. I paid £2.50 to get on it. So we're subsidising the transport to the extent that you're starting to lower really the barriers to people, for people, should I say, to get into work, into college. We're commissioning adult skills a lot better and with a lot less waste and a lot more quality in the system than was previously the case. And you can start to see, in terms of efforts around child poverty, in terms of some of the big capital projects, we're sat here in Newcastle where you've got things like Fourth Yards, you've got Gates of Keys over the river. Yeah, and typically, you will see a mixture of things that are short-term and very people-focused and things that are long-term and capital investment-focused, the bricks and mortar, if you like. And there's always got to be a mixture of those things that you're pushing.
And jobs are on the increase, absolute and percentage of unemployment and those sort of things. Is that a key number for you?
Completely. So if you're going to strip this back from an economic point of view, you look at GVA, you look at jobs. But let's face it, this region has always had a high level of independence between the public service and social infrastructure in the region and the economic performance of the region. So it's not just about GVA growth. What we're seeing is we can trace a pretty direct line between the things we are doing and the jobs that are created, particularly where it is around inward investment, and we're actually investing in business growth. But of course, we're also sensitive to macro conditions, and the history of the region suggests, with a fragile labour market, slow response to economic shocks in the past. It is a combination, isn't it, of what we might do to be part of the entrepreneurial local state, you might say, but it also takes a well-functioning national government and a global climate to get things right as well, as you can see in terms of people's day-to-day experience now.
I think I can see Andy flicking a speak to me finger there, but also how would you respond to that economist, Duncan Weldon, was it, who said that we've got Portugal with a bit of Singapore somewhere further down? Does that mean that every region like the Northeast is not the Singapore spaceship of London and having trouble, or does the Northeast have particular historic and social fabric issues that have constrained its economy?
Well, at a sort of superficial level, if you looked at disparities in levels of pay and productivity and gross value added, there still is, regrettably, a very sharp divide. And the Northeast scores on the doors aren't great, even relative to some of the other regions of England. And that is the legacy, odd sort of legacy, but legacy nonetheless, of years, decades, in fact, of underinvestment. There's no surprise, by the way, that that should be the case when we look at 30, 40, perhaps 50 years of far less investment into the Northeast than into the Southeast for sure, but actually into other regions of England as well. So the legacy of that underinvestment, both in physical things like houses and roads and rail and reservoir, and in human things like people's skills. You go through 30 or 40 years of underinvesting systematically, then you get those big gaps in pay and productivity. Now, here comes the good news, because there is some good news. That means there is enormous, I do mean enormous, scope for catch-up in the Northeast. If those levels of investment can be leveled up, if I can use that now defunct expression. And one of the great things, and great is the right word, for the new strategic combined authority that Henry and Kim leads, is one, it provides strategic oversight and coordination across the region. Keyword strategic. All of a sudden, the region can think big and joined up, having for too long thought small and not joined up, to put it charitably, to be honest. And we now see that happening. We now see the joining up of the different arms of policy, the joining up of the different regions, parts of the region, and we see a scale of project and initiative that we've not seen in the Northeast, perhaps for a generation, perhaps two. And that is the huge benefit that strategic oversight through a new strategic authority can bring. Now, have the full fruits of that been harvested yet? No, it's still early days. Are early signs encouraging? All the projects that Henry mentioned, the region now being discussed in terms that put her on equal footing with far longer lived and in some ways more mature combined authorities. Think West Midlands, where Henry used to work, think Greater Manchester, which is the apple of many people's eye just at the moment. We now have the Northeast from a standing start still being among the pack of trailblazer regions in England, driving forward the course of devolution. All those things give me real optimism, more optimism, I'd say, than in any time in my working life, about that latent potential in the region being unlocked. Is there lots of catch-up still needed? Absolutely. Will this require a rather different approach to regeneration than the past, in particular with a greater focus on private rather than public capital to drive it forward, given our straitened financial and fiscal times? Yes, I think that will. And that means, Henry and his colleagues, as they already are, will need to reach out, open their arms well beyond the region, indeed well beyond the nation, for prospective investors into the region.
Yeah.
To harvest what I think are some fantastic projects which will yield some fantastic returns.
And you've already been doing that to a large extent, Henry. And one of the selling points that we know is that it's cheaper to do it here than other parts of the UK, and you can get the returns. And that resonates with some of those inward investors and the ecosystem that is already here.
I mean, in my view, inward investors typically want to understand the skills base. They want to understand the housing stock. They want to understand that this is a good place to live. So I think there's some even more basic things than you're describing that you need in place. And by the way, that's getting more and more important as the skills base for different industries is changing. You look at the shift from oil and gas into renewables, just as one example of that.
Yes.
Obviously, that will take quite a long time and will be a kind of mixed economy for quite a long time. But how we work proactively with the skills base is a really important part of that. Land and availability of land is a thing, especially if you want to have a big gigafactory that's making batteries for vehicles, or you want a hyperscale data center like we're seeing in Camas, so the availability of land, power, having water nearby, these are all geographical assets that make a difference too. Viability,
How
cost
have we
and
got the power off the coast? Wind power?
We're working on that. National grid connectivity is a big thing in terms of industry. They tell us two things at the moment. One is the cost of energy, extremely high, quite prohibitive. If you look at that in comparative terms, we're not doing great as a country. Second is about access to that power. So let's say you have two data centers in the region that are sucking up power at the rate that they do. It just stands to reason that equation has to look a bit different. But the viability and value issue is it works two ways. So yes, it is cheaper to, on the face of it anyway, to buy land here, to build. Not that much cheaper to build. Construction costs tell you that story.
Yep.
But low land value makes housing less viable typically as well. So the other side of the equation is that to take a developer profit and get house building moving at the pace that we're going to need in the region, that is more difficult too. So as a form or tier of government, there are quite a few bits of intervention that are needed. They're not all straightforward. It's not just about passing a check over the wall or shouting at government for more money. It's about the mix of things you need in order to land new investments and also make this a decent place to grow a business if you're already here. And the single biggest thing that the region has struggled from, part of the underinvestment that Andy talked so eloquently about, is in terms of research, R&D, venture capital, business growth related funding. This region has been a real cold spot for a long time globally, but also within the UK, and that has to change over the next few years. That is why we're investing so proactively in that space at the moment.
Is now a time to talk about universities?
Potentially, yes, because the universities will be one source of that R&D, definitely, but also of spin-outs and startups from the student population. What do you see the role of the universities being?
Oh, it's a big question, and I'll attempt a big enough answer. The role of universities, I mean, it couldn't be more fundamental to the economic future of the region. Again, to do the 442 of the answer, big employers, huge student base, big economic presence within the places in which we have universities. So two in this city we're sat in. We have Sunderland University and Durham as well as a part of our four within this part of the Northeast. In terms of the money that they bring in from research, the student spending, the whole spectrum is fantastically important to us economically. If we want high value jobs in future, if we want the region to lead on areas like offshore wind, let's say, or advanced manufacturing and automotive, or AI, even if you reference the AI growth zone.
Satellites, aerospace.
Yeah, Lockheed's investment in and with Northumbria is a great example of that. And we absolutely need our universities to be firing. The incentives, I think, to translate frontier research into new businesses and into, in turn, business clusters is probably weaker than it needs to be.
Yeah.
You're seeing Combined Authority and others putting some capital investment into that space, creating incubator spaces to be able to do that. And I think the settlement with UKRI and the research establishment nationally needs to change in order to reflect a version of expertise that's not just about research production and research quality, but about what it does out there in the real world. And I think the Northeast has quite a strong case to make on that.
And it does seem to be that UKRI are, with their new sort of 3 buckets, are sort of pushing on that, and with increased settlement for Innovate UK as well.
I think so. And again, credit to the mayors collectively and our mayor up here who's made the case really loudly to Patrick Vallance and others that it's not okay for excellence to be synonymous with the Golden Triangle and full stop, end of conversation. Let's move on. That cannot be the answer. That is underutilising the economic capacity that the country has. And I'm not sure we're in a place nationally where we can afford to do that.
We can ask Andy on the national perspective, but also you're heavily involved with Sheffield University. And I was at a university event last week where they were talking about the budgets which are going to be much more linked to industrial strategy. Your point about clusters, etc. Is that the way forward, Andy?
Well, I mean, the starting point here in the region is a fantastic endowment of 4 universities that span the space from sort of frontier research, that's more Durham, Newcastle, right through to the more vocational and commercial. Think Sunderland's work on nursing, say, and medical, and Northumbria, which, by the way, when I looked a few years ago, was the top ranked university in the whole of the UK for spin-outs. Little known. So that's a fantastic starting point, endowment, upon which you absolutely would hope that a business engine, a bigger business engine for the region, could and should be built. I do think that was going to require, and this is true of the higher education sector generally, some quite significant changes in business models. One of those, for example, is that I think they'll very likely will need to see a move towards something where degree apprenticeships become much more the norm rather than the exception. They then give local employers, local businesses a natural pipeline of talent. They give students a natural pathway into the world of work. And indeed, if you repurpose the apprentice levy, which despite its tweaks is still odd and defective, that could be used to help solve some of the financial problems facing most of the higher education sector.
Yep.
So I think there's some adaptation of business models that will be needed to meet the needs of students, to meet the needs of local businesses. I think there's going to be a need to find or to redirect monies into ensuring that rich pipeline of startups and scale-ups can fully find their potential. I mean, the truth is that UK PLC generally occupies a really enviable position when it comes to startups and potential scale-ups. On a per capita basis, we're arguably the global leader when it comes to those very fast growing cults and thoroughbreds, not yet unicorns, but en route to being so. But too many of them get starved of capital at their scale-up phase, and that's certainly true in the Northeast as well. So there is a job of work to be done to ensure that those businesses remain local, creating local jobs for local people and growing local skills to fulfill their potential. I know this is one aspect of the venture capital market that Henry and colleagues are thinking hard about. How do we get, for example, more local government pension scheme money into those businesses? How do we ensure that UKRI, you mentioned UKRI, but also the British Business Bank and the National Wealth Fund allocate sufficient of their portfolio to this region? That's all work in progress, but the seed corn of success, which is those innovative, high potential businesses, that is there. And that's among the reasons I remain resolutely optimistic about both UK PLC and the Northeast region in particular.
And I will be shot if I don't correct a very eminent economist. It was Northumbria's the student startups rather than the staff spin-outs. They are absolutely brilliant at student startups. But they will say themselves that they don't have that spin-out. And what's interesting, I think, from Newcastle is lots of our excellent spin-outs were coming in from the medical school, and now more and more people like Kindwell coming from engineering and so on. So,
And you're starting to see the universities work together now.
Yeah,
right?
much
It's
more.
really important. So the development of a body that is called imaginatively Universities for North East England
Yep.
is an important thing, because it starts to make that a collective endeavour, doesn't it? It's not Newcastle versus Durham.
No.
And it's not Northumbria versus Sunderland. It's looking at complementary strengths, which can only help with the journey that Andy's described. It also sort of reflects the thing I forgot to mention, which is really important, and you might well come to this, but if you think about the intangible things that make the region work, it's not just about our economic future and jobs and skills. It's about the culture of the region.
Yes.
It's about its imagination about itself, isn't it? Maybe this is back to
Yep.
Andy's narrative point, but universities hold cultural partnerships that are so fundamental to the region, and each of our universities do that. And you can see in the development of what you probably call culture-based regeneration or something similar, that will not go away. That has driven progress in places like Gateshead, where I'm from. If you look at the Riverside, the Glasshouse, the Baltic, the Angel of the North, we are ripe, I think, for a new generation of culture-based regeneration, but in a different context and for slightly different purposes. And the universities are really, really fundamental to that. I would add, I think, maybe this is a bugbear of mine. You can tell me whether others on the podcast are interested, but I do think it is up to us it's up to the universities in the region to start to drag the public sector as well. So the creation of these bodies can't just be about responding to what the combined authority needs or what the latest government policy is, whether it's a levelling up white paper or an expression of interest form that we might put out. You need to drag us into the future as well. What does this region need to look like? What are our future challenges? How should we be addressing them together? And that is a role for the university sector, along with others, but one that the universities should be, I think, and can start to lead together.
and some of that work sort of almost being done, not necessarily by the universities, but the universities being corralled, cajoled by people like North East Times. So they've got their Vision 31 campaign and bringing people together. I think this thing about more private investment, so encouraging startup scale-ups to be investment ready. We've got some fantastic investors in the region. How do you get businesses from this region to access money, as you said, from not just nationally, but internationally? And I know that's also for investment, sort of capital investment into infrastructure with the National Wealth Fund and things like that.
And that's the point about devolution, isn't it? You act as a convening force. You act as a quickening force where you can. You make global trade easier and more intuitive because you have a regional figurehead in the mayor who can, and in fact, in the case of our mayor, literally did go to Japan at the end of last year and come back with deals that were additive. Has been in Washington recently, so that there is a sort of diplomacy bit here that's really important. But we should, as I said earlier, a combined authority is not here. The public sector is not here to do everything. We're there to create the space and convene. And the moment where you start to think, okay, this could be a runner, is when other people start using devolution, start talking about it as a means to working together. Doesn't have to come from us. It's about the culture of collaboration that you create in a region.
And are there signs that there's going to be more devolution? And is that more money? You talked about we're not the Eastern Europe to the Western Europe rich part that's going to... The Westminster doesn't have piles of cash, but it's about splitting the pie differently so that we get more, that we have our own say over. Is that just noise coming out? We're missing Keir Starmer today giving his big reboot speech 4 or whatever it is.
You might well have the answer in that speech as we speak. Who knows? If you're going to ask me, have we gone as far as we can go with devolution as is? Absolutely not. There is lots of scope for deepening of the devolved powers that we have. And by the way, I say this not for the joy of having them. It's because of the impact you can create. So let's say on areas like skills, on areas like employability. If you look at the issue that we have with worklessness, in particular for young people, and what's called the NEET issue, not individuals not in employment, training, the productivity impact of being able to do more on that with more devolved powers to do it is absolutely huge. Are we capitalised as a region to the extent that we should be? Absolutely not. But some of these things, this is a journey, to use a corny old phrase. And the way I've always seen this is a bit like a ratchet. If year on year you're doing more, whether that's legislatively or in terms of the proof positive that you give from delivering well, or government policy and strategy, the Devolution bill is the latest version of that. It all turns the ratchet a bit, doesn't it? And we need to keep going with that, because I can't see the alternative.
No.
Really. What we're going to say, this is fine, but we're going to re-centralise everything. Or we have a more credible account of economic growth that can be delivered from Whitehall. I can't see it. So we have to keep going and make this work.
Andy, you said about us needing to catch up in order to, like using the defunct phrase, level up. Have we got that ambition to really drive that catching up as a region?
Well, I mean, the first thing to say is level up doesn't mean being the same. And absolutely, it would be the biggest mistake on the planet, and not one that Henry's going to make, to think that you want to build your model on a sort of southeastern template. That would be a big mistake. Always play to your own strengths. I think it'll be very difficult. I mean, Henry mentioned the ratchet, and it's good that the ratchet's moving in the right direction. But let me be far less polite than him about the progress of devolution so far, because I'm allowed to, and he's probably not. Which is what we have right now is on devolution is half a loaf, half baked. So it's half baked because even on spending powers, Henry's hands are tied along some dimensions. He has some degree of control over some aspects of public service provision and public spending, and some remain in Whitehall hands. That makes absolutely no sense, by the way. It's bizarre. For example, Henry mentioned what you're doing on adult skills, but you have effectively no control over schools' spending and schools' curriculum. And of course, if you're going to tackle something like the NEETs problem, that begins as much in schools as when you hit the skills system. So that's the half baked bit. The half a loaf bit, of course, is we're only just beginning to have a conversation about so-called fiscal devolution, which, put simply, is giving local leaders the capacity to raise monies, either through taxation or through borrowing or issuing securities, which means that, many local leaders, all local leaders actually, are trying to execute on a plan with one hand tied behind their back. Now, in her May's lecture, 6 weeks ago now, the Chancellor did allude to the possibility of there being a bit of movement on the fiscal devolution front, and that was encouraging. But I think we need to move at pace if we are to propel forward that catch-up that you mentioned, Fiona. If we need to propel forward local growth, we need to give local leaders the tools they think they need to make good on their plans. And in some ways, that's the way I would approach devolution, rather than this incremental, frankly, painful eking out of powers from Whitehall. I think you should do what actually Gordon Brown, now back in the government, you'll have seen, suggested in his report for Keir Starmer ahead of the election, which is to flip the presumption and say to local leaders, what are the powers you need to make good on the local plan? And with a strong assumption being that you are given the powers you need to make good on that plan, unless there are exceptional reasons otherwise. So I do think on all matters devolution, the wheels are turning, but it is too slow. It is too slow to unlock all of that potential at pace. And I live in hope, or we all live in hope, don't we? If not necessarily expectation, that might be given the giddy up. Devolution might be given the serious giddy up in the years ahead, because for me, that's the only way of local areas really leveling up at speed in a way that will satisfy the obvious desire for change among local citizens.
Can I ask a question about tax? And you're saying the ability to raise local tax when we're pretty well taxed nationally anyway. But one of the ways you can see in other countries around the world is where you reduce tax. So the Floridas and Texas examples of the moment are making attractive places for people to go because New York or California are squeezing people. And I've always thought that could be an opportunity for our region to say, come here because, and it has been done for enterprise zones, but is that completely beyond HM Treasury's doctrine where we've got more tax income, is it higher PAYE in Scotland, but could you ever see it happening that you can be, if one of our problems in the Northeast is retention of graduates, that graduates get less tax if they stay here?
Yeah, I misspoke if I said just the raising of taxes. I meant to refer to the levying of taxes in their many and various forms, and having the latitude to experiment in how we go about the taxation of everything from businesses to individuals. We have seen some limited experiments already. You mentioned a few of them there, Charlie. I mean, the truth is, this can't be a deeply held part of Treasury doctrine because we already have investment zones, right? We're already doing this in a limited and piecemeal way. The key thing here would be having this determined at the local level rather than at the national level. I think one of the huge benefits, underplayed probably benefits of devolution, is that it does encourage innovation in public service provision and indeed in taxation regimes. And competition isn't always and everywhere a healthy thing, but innovation certainly is. And it's much easier to innovate and experiment locally, regionally, than it is at a national level. So I think there's huge potential to do some of what you say, building on the experience of other countries. You mentioned several examples there of regions or states or indeed countries that have ended up boosting their overall tax take by dint of doing just what you mentioned. So yes, I think if ever there were time for us thinking innovatively about our stupendously complex tax code in this country, well, both complex and regressive along so many dimensions, then this is now. And if that can't be done nationally, let's do it locally.
Is it something that anyone has ever thought to ask for you as civil servants to take to Westminster? We would like to be a innovation zone for PAYE or corporate tax?
We're in the middle of a discussion at the moment. You would expect, following the May's lecture that the Chancellor made, which opened the door to the possibility of a roadmap, because that's such a Whitehall thing to say, isn't it? I've opened the door to the possibility of a roadmap, but you get what I'm saying. See, once you open the door to forms of fiscal innovation or devolution, you have to start thinking about, from a regional point of view, okay, well, you could apportion income tax, you could have different PAYE regimes, you can think about visitor levy, lots of things that are already in the system. But the biggest question is, what do you want to do with it? Why? Okay, so having a really strong story, a growth plan, a proper plan for transport, the investment zone that we have, a sense of what investments in innovation capacity need to be made. That's the most important thing. I feel like we're in a good place there. I think we've done quite a lot of work with the stakeholder base to find a really strong story. I think Andy's right. We need more. I mean, again, I go back to this point of what's the alternative? Once you've created combined authorities, you've created these things which are a bit like Churchill says about democracy. It's the least worst. So not everybody agrees with the model, but it is democratically led. It binds in the authorities in the region. It is proven to work in a number of areas, particularly around skills, where you're seeing real shifts in provision, and in terms of stimulating innovation and growth. Greater Manchester evidence is a good example of that. You have to sweat the model. Otherwise, you end up with institutions that just pervade the status quo across the country at a slightly different level to the ones that exist already. And we life's too short. We've got to get on with it. If you were to ask our mayor here, she'd be very enthusiastic about the overnight visitor levy as an example, which doesn't tick all of the boxes of full fiscal devolution, of course, but does start to get you into a space where you're making the case to the public for a different settlement. There's the give and get is different.
Yes.
So I think we're ready for that level of conversation. I really do. And I think without that, you end up with devolution being essentially taking parcels of money from one place to another and administrating them in a different place. And that's not what we're doing here at all.
Can I come back to the skills issue, particularly the apprenticeship levy? Because I've long worked with the subsea sector in the Northeast, and this is the skills side. Every time inward investment was brought in, shows how long I've been working on this because it's from Fabricom's days, they would say, oh, we've been told that this is an amazing skilled workforce. And then the first meeting I'm invited to is to talk about skill shortages. So I think there are still substantial skill shortages. And Andy's point, the apprenticeship levy has it really been substantially tweaked? I mean, the main thing from a business school perspective is that leadership and management skills are no longer being able to be provided through the levies, which is a real blow to some of the provision that was being provided across all our 4 universities and wider. So how do we ensure that we have got the right skills, and could the apprenticeship levy be manipulated? I don't want to use that word, but modified to make it more effective?
So if you're asking me first, you are probably asking the wrong person. Not because I don't want to answer it, but because I have an extremely biased view on this, which is that all along I have thought that the apprenticeship levy should be, if you like, collected and then strategically redeployed at the level of a combined authority. I think it's slightly strange that we've got this half and half system which allows for a degree of local flexibility and passporting but doesn't really go the whole hog. We're in the business of working directly with lots of businesses to support their supply chain innovation and skills. And like you say, sometimes we need 12 welders. Yeah. If you talk to smulders along the river who are fabricating wind jackets, they need 12 welders and they need them tomorrow. And so you need the flexibility that regional working can provide. So I would gently reject the premise of the question, redesign the whole thing and make it devolved.
Andy, have you got a view on that as well?
Well, I mean, I agree with that. Labour markets are local, which means skills are local, which means the key mechanism for financing those skills needs also to be local. The logic of that, I think, is fairly watertight. But I mean, stepping back to the initial design, I mean, that was brought in, of course, to boost the numbers of apprenticeships across the UK. That was improve their quality, but also to significantly improve their increase the numbers. And that singly has not happened. Apprenticeships are down a third since the levy came in, which is saying that something has gone fundamentally wrong. Not a tweak, fundamentally wrong with its design. Now, you could make a plausible argument for saying, well, one of the aspects of its design that's got fundamentally wrong is that it's taxing something that you ought to be subsidizing, right? A good chunk of the apprentice levy proceeds, of course, do not go towards apprenticeships at all. They're just part of general taxation that goes in the Treasury coffers. But more fundamentally, other countries, some other countries at least around the world, in the same way as we extend tax credits to investment in R&D, why is it that we do the opposite of that? In other words, tax investment in what most people and businesses would say was their most important asset, which is people.
Yep.
And that would be a very different model of trading tax credits as distinct from an apprentice levy. We need to have a debate about that. It's not costless, but the starting point here is us systematically growing too few of our own. There are probably 10 million people, approaching a third of the workforce, who do not have the skills they need to be as productive as they might in the world of work. Another 3 million who are not underskilled but are overskilled for the job that they are doing. And the apprentice levy or our skill system isn't the entire solution to that problem, but it's a significant part of the solution to that problem. And by the way, it exists now, this skills mismatch, probably for the first time in human history, now exists at both ends of the skills distribution. It's not just at the lower skilled end, it's also true at the higher skilled end. I mean, this is uncomfortable for you in a university,
It is.
but the NEET rate among graduates is now higher than it is among those leaving schools with A levels, which is telling us that we're producing the wrong stuff in our universities. I mean, you get the same conclusion by looking at the student loan book, which has a sort of 50% default rate. So this is a skills problem that is now very broadly based, and the current configuration, not just of the levy, but of our whole approach to skills, both among the lower and higher levels, is not doing what we wish. So, if ever there were time for giving this a heave ho and some fundamental rethink, it is now. Regrettably, the government has so far not done that. Its skills white paper was very thin.
Yep.
And it's had very little of any interest to say about either the FE or the HE sectors.
And also that there should be more of an ability for the FE and HE sectors to work together.
Exactly.
Which we are doing within the region. I think we're starting to do within the region across the universities, but not necessarily, universities and colleges, but not necessarily enough. I was listening to somebody speak at the Creative Industries Policy and Evidence Symposium that was held here a couple of weeks ago. There was this argument that, well, universities shouldn't be putting on courses that they know there isn't a jobs demand for. But then the other argument is, this was not in this region, it was in another one that will remain nameless, that they were putting on loads and loads of animation courses, but there weren't jobs for the animators when they were coming out. It's like, yeah, but universities will put on courses if there's a demand for the course. So it's not particularly joined up.
Shall we flick into move the discussion on about culture?
Yes,
because
please.
We have the chair of the Glasshouse Music here, and the Combined Authority has also made some big investments in Centre for Writing, music awards, and the like. For Andy, is culture a useful driver for broadening the region and making it attractive live in and to bring people back to?
Existential, I'd say, Charlie. You need your business engine to generate the jobs. Of course you do. You need your transport system to enable people to get to the jobs. You need your housing system to give people somewhere to live. But frankly, if there's nothing to do after 6 o'clock in an evening, why would you want to work there and live there?
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a recognition now globally that cultural and creative capital, if I can use those words, is as foundational to the regeneration story as physical capital and human capital and social capital and all those other good things. So
but our region with a smaller population base has done well by building some behemoths of culture that then have a cost that comes with it. And the Glass House is a beautiful top 10 in the world concert hall, but the local draw is challenged to pay for concert tickets. And how do you put it on the map so that people will get the train up here to go and see brilliant stuff? I'm sure that you're wrestling with that in terms of that and the sort of donor base that's local and or national to try and...
Yeah.
How's your feeling so far in post?
Well, I mean, the starting point, Glasshouse-wise, in terms of being of the region, rooted in the region, and being for the region, I think is actually pretty strong, Charlie, to be honest. So, in terms of cost of tickets, I think we are certainly bill ourselves as being the most accessible, financially accessible music venue in the UK. As you know, we do a huge amount with the local population in terms of music education in our academy, young and old. And of course, it's in the nature of, what's true of big businesses, true of big culture as well, that they grow their own supply chain. And we see ourselves as playing an incubator role for smaller cultural and creative groups and enterprises with whom we partner. But listen, that's not to say that we're resting on our laurels remotely. And Henry mentioned the Gateshead Quays project, about which we speak regularly, and I think we're both probably overexcited about, Henry. I certainly am. I think it holds huge potential.
That's for a venue alongside yours that has been...
Quite what it becomes
yes.
Remains, that's still in discussion. Frankly, anything would beat what's there currently, which is a building site. But in terms of eyes to the horizon and what it could be, could Gateshead become the new Salford in terms of regeneration? Absolutely it could. Could that whole site become a South Bank of the North? Absolutely it could. Would that then be for everyone in the Newcastle Gateshead region? Absolutely it would. Think pubs, think restaurants, think retail, think residential, in addition to all the fantastic cultural offerings, music, art at the Baltic, perhaps a new arena, who knows? So I think, I know this is absolutely in Henry's line of sight, that the plan is to make the Glass House and all that surrounds it, Gateshead Quays wise, even more rooted in the region for local citizens, but equally, as is true of Salford, a beacon nationally and internationally for how to do regeneration well, in a way that lifts the fortunes of local residents, but nonetheless draws admiring glances from right around the country, indeed right around the world. And I think that's well within our compass if we play our cards right.
I've always thought that the return on investment potential of Arena 2, a big site that can do both concerts, culture and corporate events and the hotels and resonant, multiplier effect is more in sight than the TV studio that's been talked about. But the TV studio has got the running in terms of the money. Is that because the arena has stalled, or?
I mean, they're different projects, right? So it probably sounds like a trite thing to say, but they require different. They're in different markets. They require different things to get them away. So
No, it's an and, not a but.
yeah,
for me,
exactly.
yeah.
But Andy's right. You what is within reach will absolutely kickstart a phase of regeneration on the south bank of the city, if you choose to call it that. But in Gateshead, that is really exciting, and that's what we're investing in. So we are investing to create the development platform to be able to realise something other than what you see there at the moment, right? So yes, that could be a Gateshead's version of the Aviva in Manchester, let's say. That can absolutely coexist with a facility on the banks of the river in Sunderland.
Yes.
Of course it can. I mean, but to be honest, and to give credit where it's due, all across the region through some really difficult times in terms of spending power being constrained for local authorities, and actually being quite difficult to raise private finance for some of these things, you're seeing investments in the cultural sphere thriving. You look at the Maldings in Berwick, you look at Culture House in Sunderland, you look at the Story in Durham. These are all examples of locally led initiatives that recognise that actually the marginal pound spent on culture-based regeneration is additive in terms of what else it can bring. And in the near term, we'll support your housing offer, and we'll make housing on the sheepfolds along the riverbank in Sunderland more attractive, for example. So there's a pretty impeccable economic logic to it if you can make it work. But you just think about what the region is without it. I mean, we have to make sure we are leaving legacy here that is meaningful, and is meaningful from an emotional point of view and from a cultural point of view, as well as the sort of straight up economic outcomes that we're trying to hit.
And I know a lot of people sort of talk about the, troubles with hospitality, but I think the opening of the 2 5-star hotels, the Dakota and the Gotham, is a real sort of shot of confidence in the region, because actually I was with some of Andy's colleagues at the Glass House, and they were saying one of the things that means it's harder to get Oasis to perform in this region, it's not just the lack of sort of chimney pots, as you might say. I don't know, we don't have coal fires anymore, but we do still have mock chimney pots. But it was also that the performers would demand a 5-star hotel. So, you've got that. And so there is a sign of confidence.
That's right. And I think to tip slightly into a different sector, albeit very, very closely related, if you look at sort of place marketing, tourism, visitor economy, doesn't traditionally appear in your classic economic plan because it's not perceived to be high value enough. You look at our plans, that is front and centre. We've committed to growing the size of the visitor economy by, or doubling it, should I say, over the next two plus terms. We want to do that partly because it's an economic end in itself, and of course in places like Northumberland, County Durham, that side of the economy is hugely important day to day. But it also adds to everything else, doesn't it? And so the experience of visiting, coming to let's say a conference that's hosted on the riverside, and then the follow-on from that is huge. You know that from international evidence, from US cities in particular. So there is a logic behind all of this. The thing that ties that together, I think, again, to go back to the very beginning, is the story, it's the narrative. What are you trying to do here? So this is not just about getting buildings away that couldn't be built otherwise. It's not just about densifying areas that don't have anything on them for the purposes of doing that. It's about what type of region you're trying to create. And if you start to do that through the lens of devolution, you start to be able to look at the Northeast in the round and say, well, okay, maybe that's okay to do much more of that intensively in our city centres, and do something different in rural Northumberland, and do something different in coastal South Tyneside. And you see some of that coming through too. A great example alongside that is the regeneration of South Shields Town Centre, which is essentially us supporting the relocation of the college.
Yes.
Dramatically changes the type of footfall in the city centre, in the town centre, should I say, and the things you can do around it. So there's, none of this will happen overnight, but I really believe we're investing in the right places, and I think the benefits of that, if you think about the types of economy we're serving, it's not just high GVA, high wage, high value. It is people working in B&Bs, it's people working in the financial sector, it's people working in colleges, it's students. That is just as important, I think.
And just on that sort of, when we were talking about we would never try to recreate something that works in the southeast up here, but we've got the ports and we've still got, and I know it's that sort of the Renaissance story that you were talking about with Andy Street, we sort of, there's that nostalgia for the shipbuilding, but actually it wasn't really a very nice place to work at all. But the marine industry is still absolutely thriving from here. So that moving of South Shields Maritime College, and you've got North Standard on the north bank of the south bank of the
Exactly.
which they insure 1 in 5, probably more than 1 in 5 of all ocean-going
Exactly,
ships.
and you've got, and that's an example of a sector or set of sectors that has always had the potential to be quite transformative for the region, or certainly has for, let's say, the last 30, 40 years. But the gap between the potential and where you're actually seeing new jobs generated is now very, very small. So the announcement from Crown Estate of the latest round of offshore leasing, in essence, 450 new wind turbines off the coast of the northeast, the servicing of those, the construction of the jackets, the cabling, the trenching, all of those things will create a massive amount of economic value add and jobs and skills effectively in this region. And it will happen over the next 10 years. This isn't miles and miles away.
Did I read 30,000 jobs?
Could be. Well, we will obviously be ambitious and push for as many as possible, but our analysis is that, 25 to 30,000 jobs realistically, and that will, I think, stick more effectively because you are seeing that kind of collaboration across the ports. You're seeing the airport weighing in now. I mean, this is best airport in the world as voted for by its peers. We have assets here that are really significant, and if you factor the geography in too, why would we want to take the Greater Manchester growth model and replicate it here, even if we thought it could work? There's a chance to do something really special and different.
We need to wrap up. Can we ask you 5 quick-fire questions before you go?
What is the Northeast phrase, habit or attitude you most love? Andy first.
I mean, attitude-wise, I'd say so I was born in the Northeast, but I spent most of my life away. But whenever I come back, however long I've been away, I always feel the warmth of the welcome. And that's a uniquely Northeast thing. And the warmth never cools however long I've been away.
We're going to ask you all 5.
Yep.
What is the one thing most misunderstood about the Northeast?
Well, I think the secret, the well-kept secret that most of the world don't realise is just how beautiful the place is. Yeah, Henry knows that I think it's the Northumbrian coastline is the most beautiful coastline in the UK, one of the most beautiful that exists. So that is not understood, and I hope it remains a secret.
What advice would you give your 21-year-old self?
Yeah, I was difficult and angsty at 21, so probably to relax a bit. It might never happen.
What regional business, institution or place should more people know about?
Well, I'm going to give an obvious answer, which is the Glass House, because we are an international centre for music, and there's a lot further for us to go to appear on the national map, much less the international one. And that would be absolutely in keeping, given how fantastic our orchestra building and academy is.
And finally, one thing the region should be braver about.
Well, I think telling its story, to end where we started, in a suitably forward-looking and uplifting way, because I think that's absolutely in keeping with all that Henry and Kim and their colleagues are doing. And as pessimism is contagious, so too is optimism. And I could very quickly see the Northeast vibe spreading contagiously, and even more good things therefore coming to the region.
Thank you. So, Henry, one Northeast phrase, habit or attitude you love?
I love it that everyone says, "Eee." And I missed it while I was away. And being back in the region, I'm pleased to be surrounded by people saying, "Eee."
For everything.
For everything.
As an interjection.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. What one thing do you think is most misunderstood by outsiders?
Oh, people think it's cold up here, but it's lovely.
As I got into the taxi and said, God, it's cold, isn't it? It's May. What advice would you give your 21-year-old self?
I'd say you're not going to be a DJ and you're not going to play for Newcastle United. So just crack on with the other things.
You could still be a DJ.
What one place, institution, business would you think more people should know about?
So I'm going to go slightly left field and mention a new band, new jazz trio called Nats, Knats, who just put out a great new album about the Northeast, Newcastle. Fantastic.
Avant-garde.
Not avant-garde, just extremely groovy, Charlie. Yeah.
I missed it, obviously.
Obviously.
They were in The Guardian, I think. That's giving away
Oh,
my...
well, Charlie wouldn't read that.
Yes. I was going to say that's giving
I
away
think I'll put the link on my LinkedIn.
my
The
media
review
reading.
of it.
One thing the region should be braver about.
Ooh, the region, maybe talking about its future self, yeah? Like modernity. Let's do it. There's no reason why we shouldn't be the leading light in the UK in terms of growth, development, what a future region looks like. Let's do it.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very, very much for your input. It's been really good.
Exactly.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Great speaking to you all. I'll catch up with you soon.
Yeah.
Will do.
Cheers.